So do we know if John or Mitch is joining today?
I don't actually. I can check if John's out of the office. I don't think he is.
Okay, no. Mike, do you want to ping Mitch?
Yeah, I'll ping Mitch and ask.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, John just told me he'll be a little bit late.
Okay, well, we can just get going.
Yeah, probably just get going. I saw Keith just joined too. So yeah, let's get it going.
So 125 release managers, do we have any volunteers, or are we just doing the call for
Okay,
volunteers?
yeah. So I will make sure everyone knows this situation. So Daniel, you guys don't know, Daniel signed up to be release manager, I believe, for 124. Daniel, are you the shadow for 124, but ends up actually did a lot of work with John. So you guys kind of serve as the primary release manager for 124 because the lack of communication for Zhonghu, and he was busy and didn't do the 124 release manager work. Mike, please correct anything if I said it wrong, because I've been hearing from other people. So Mike, also you help a lot, so hopefully you get trained too.
Yeah, it was just a little bit difficult with time zones, such that like with the parts that Zhanghu was leading, I wasn't able to learn directly as those were happening. So I was trying to pick up pieces as Daniel and John were kind of running it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so thank you for that context, Mike and Daniel. So for 125, though, Daniel is actually going to be on the relocation from US to out of US. I don't know if Daniel, you want to announce it in public, but there are a few weeks Daniel will be out of availability at all. So that, and unfortunately, that few weeks is also from middle of January. Okay, Daniel is moving to Europe. Congratulations, which we all want you to go. So he's going to be on the relocation from middle of January to until after the first week of February. So he's effectively being out of availability for 3 weeks, which is the critical 3 weeks time of the release. So Daniel kindly asked if somebody else can, because he didn't feel comfortable to be the secondary release manager for 125, given he's going to be out for the critical 3 weeks to relocate to Europe. Fasila has kindly stepped in for Daniel as the secondary release manager. So Daniel is okay to be a shadow for 125, because shadow means less availability and accountability, and he's happy to help out post 125, just the relocation. I'd rather not put Daniel for anything during his relocation window. So Mike, I want to bring this up. I want to make sure you are good with this plan. Fasila, we recently asked her, she was okay with that. Certainly Fasila is an outstanding maintainer in the community for a long time. So I'm hoping you to be okay with this change, Mike.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm good with it. I've shadowed one and been secondary on 124. So I think that I've noticed that there's a handful of things that seem to not be working properly with automation. So definitely, like I've been talking with Priscilla already, and we kind of want to like get some of the stuff rolling sooner rather than later to kind of test the dry run stuff and hopefully fix some of the things that are broken, rather than trying to at the last minute figure out what needs to happen manually.
That's great. That's exactly why, we need a fresh eyes on the release manager team. So thank you so much, Mike, to already work with Facilla to get a head start on this. Really appreciate it.
So, sorry, Mike, you're going to be primary?
Yes, I will be.
Yeah, awesome. That's all for this topic. The next topic I also added, I just want to make sure everybody are aware of. We are doing a TOC election for the 2 vacant seats. I don't know when the election will finish. Chris, you may know. Oh, Louis, you might know too from steering. Is it a week? In a week, we'll have the results.
I don't actually know the deadline.
Started. Look, 9 days from December 4th, so December 13th, I believe, is the latest that it will finish up.
So this basically by the steering meeting this Thursday.
Yes.
Friday.
Friday, maybe.
The question is, it will probably take until the next Monday, depending on Greg's availability since he's the election officer and then in a different time zone. So Friday or Monday is when we'll have the results.
All right, that's great. Because I think it's a good time for us to think about roadmap for next year. So let's wait until the new TOC member are seated, then we can start working on the roadmap doc. All right, Louis, I think we're good on this topic. Maybe pass to Mike to talk about 125.
Sure.
All right. So yeah, talking with John and Facilla, we're just trying to plan dates for the 125 release. I basically looked at 3 months out from the calendar per John's suggestion and tried to pick Tuesdays. And yeah, was basically just seeking TOC approval so that we can get this updated on the wiki and get stuff confirmed. And hopefully also get the released 125 channel created. Because I don't think I have permissions to do that. And
Yeah, that
happy
looks
for
good to me.
feedback if any of these dates should shift one way or another.
I think it's reasonable. The only thing I would say is, so February 11, right? Expected release date. I think the solo team has an offsite the week before, so hopefully that won't impact the release. Well, we're not the release manager, so should be okay.
No, it should be fine.
Yeah, okay. Any objections to Mike's plan? I think it looks good.
All right. Thanks, y'all. We'll get this updated in the wiki.
Okay. Ben, do you want to pull some of the future stuff into the agenda?
Yeah, I did want to talk about the ambient wrapper chart. The first bullet at least. We've had and the first bullet. No, yeah, that's it. Thank you. We've had a couple people run into issues with that and get confused by it. Basically, the TLDR is we don't test this and can't test it and don't intend to. So I would prefer to just remove it and tell people to use the constituent individual charts, which is less convenient, but unless we like actually support wrapper charts and when I say support, I mean include them in integration testing in some fashion or docs tests, I think they do more harm than good. So I would prefer to delete that. It is currently an example, but I think we've had some people use it. So unless there's an objection, I'd like to go ahead and remove it. If there is an objection, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go and do it.
Do we know what was blocking us from being able to test it? You mentioned we can't test it.
The desire was to not document it or support it because as a wrapper chart, it doesn't support the upgrade cadences we want. People use it because it's convenient, but also we don't really want to support the install everything in one shot and don't manage them separately flow. Like that was the TOC feedback, is we don't want to encourage people to do that. Thus, we can't document it, which means no doc tests. So yeah, without a test, I don't really feel comfortable doing anything. If we can't document it and we can't test it, I don't want to include it. It's kind of where I'm coming down with it. So like, there's a pathway where we could come up with a different kind of wrapper chart composition. We had talked about like maybe a data plane and control plane wrapper chart, like instead of just one, have two. But either way, this guy I think needs to go. I'll defer to the talk on this, but like the fastest thing to me is just to get rid of it, since we do have people that are using it running issues. They do seem to want something like it, but this particular one is just, you know.
I'm wondering. Well, I guess what I'm thinking is we really ought to have a story in this space. The demo use case of getting Istio up quickly, while not something that we necessarily want to promote for production, is still an important use case. It's still an area where we've heard from users a lot as we launched Ambient. 5 charts was too many charts. Most of our competition can be installed with 1 chart, and that might be ludicrous when it comes to production, but it's actually very effective when trying to quickly demonstrate the value of the project. I wonder if there's potential for creating docs pages just for the purpose of testing and marking them as hidden on the site, or some other creative solution to this problem. I know a lot of work went into this, and it'd be sad to see it just tossed out. Not my work, for what it's worth. I think, Ben, you worked on it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I don't care necessarily about. We need some sort of wrapper, because I think we've all seen people say that 5 is too many. We have people in Argo that just want to do 1, or maybe 2. Maybe 2 we justify. So like my personal stance is I think we could do this with 2 charts as opposed to 1, and maybe that's what I would like to see. But I don't want to go do that unless somebody or the TOC basically says, yes, we're comfortable going in that direction or trying that or something.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Mitch and Ben here. I think we do need a story here, but at the same time, this feels like the signal is to iterate on this from a technical perspective. We want the simple solution that was that took some work but was relatively fast, that put things together in 1 chart. There's friction here, therefore we should iterate and come up with something else. And in the meantime, help users not bump their toe using a thing that we know has some issues. I'm persuaded, at least facially, by the idea of 2 charts. At least I think there's still a singleton issue of like CRDs and things like that, but generally that sounds like a good direction to explore. But I'd like to discuss more from a technical approval perspective. But I do agree that if we know the ambient wrapper chart is a dead end, we should just remove it.
Okay, so sounds like removal is good. Is there appetite for me writing up a proposal for maybe the 2 chart approach, and like wrangling with that and putting it in front of people, see what we think about it? Or
I would be cautious about removal before we have a plan, because I think it looks odd for us. We announced the removal without a approved plan. Ideally, I would hold off the removal until we have a better plan, maybe landed in a release. Because I remember a lot of people were very excited about this wrapper charts, and we got a lot of pins. So it would look silly that we announce a removal without intention or a backup, a better thing landed in a release before we remove it.
I hear you. I think I'm sensitive to that as well. I do think that, you know, the wrapper chart, I mean, if it has a feature status, it's probably experimental. I'm just, if we're going to have feature statuses, it feels like we need to take advantage of them in some cases, especially with limited engineering resources. I think ideally, yes, we have a replacement ready to go, but that takes time. And if we could do it maybe before the next release, that would be, I'd be fine with that. If we think it's going to potentially extend past the next release, I'd be more in favor of removing, or at least announcing intention to remove, deprecating something. It's some signal out there to users that this is not a chart that they should be consuming. Maybe we just don't release a wrapper chart for 125, and that's signal enough. Well, but then the people on 124 can't upgrade. So yeah, we have to. I think we have to do something to send that signal to users that they shouldn't continue to use it. Otherwise, we make our problem worse.
Keith, I do want to take issue with just one thing. I heard you say that people on 125, or people already using it can't upgrade. I do think that's the point of this chart. We don't expect anyone to upgrade using this chart, so that's its functioning as designed.
That's fair.
Where my concerns are is maybe I'm missing context that you all have, but so far what I've heard is that the problem with the existing chart is that it's not tested. And the solution is to remove it and create 2 more charts instead. I don't understand how that solution solves the problem.
Because then I think we could actually, the idea is that if we created a two chart mechanism that satisfied everybody's requirements as far as being something we could recommend in an upgrade. Basically, if we can recommend it as an option, then we can document it, we can doc test it, we can write tests around it. If it's something that would basically say if it's like this, and we just say, look, we're putting it out, we tell you not to use it. We don't want to document how to use it because we don't want people to use it. It's just sort of a mystery thing. It doesn't really get tested. Like the only way to test a thing is to effectively recommend it as an option. And I'm saying if we get to a 2 chart solution that we're comfortable recommending to people in certain contexts, then it becomes, then we just doc test it or integration test it, and we're good. You know, basically that's kind of the hang up, right? It has to be something we recommend to people before it is effective to really test it.
So we have a number of things in the samples directory, like the book info application. We don't recommend users run book info in production, but we have a great deal of testing on the book info application. I'm wondering if there's a similar paradigm that we could use to test the chart that we have today, rather than building 2 new ones to replace it and trying to get to a point where we can recommend a control plane then data plane upgrade approach that seems very close to the YOLO approach that we've tried to encourage our users to avoid.
I mean, because it's the first thing you install, right? It's a little bit tricky to do it as like a second, like book info is just like used as examples in a lot of other guides as a side effect thing. So it's sort of a special case in that regard. It's not like where you start. You just install book info to test various things. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. But yeah, as far as the 2 is, I would also point out that this is not a large chart. This is 5 lines of YAML. Wrapper charts don't have anything in them. Most of the effort for doing 2 or 1 or whatever would just be like making sure our existing charts compose correctly as per Helm, which is something they kind of should do anyway. So there's not a lot of effort to be put into creating these wrapper charts. It's more about fixing any bugs that fall out of that in the individual charts we have that don't compose correctly. Which is
Right.
work, but I'm saying, yeah, that's a different. It's not that the charts themselves are hard to make. The wrapper charts themselves are hard to create.
By the way, Ben, is there anybody complaining about the wrapper charts not working, or is there, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
are
we've
we-
had a couple of people raise the issue bug. We've had at least one bug recently, I think, where someone was like, the install isn't working and I'm using the wrapper chart. And the solution was, okay, don't use the wrapper chart. It's not tested or supported, which I'd like to avoid, right? So
Okay.
that's what I'm talking about.
I know at one point we discussed having the wrapper chart named something like Istio demo. Is that still the case?
It is in the demo. It is in the demo. We aren't able to publish it to a different Helm URL path that has demo in it, or at least it's not being published now. But it is in the samples repo. Like it's segregated from the rest of the charts. But even if it's a demo, we should have at least some sort of test that makes sure it works if we want to recommend it. Like there's no, I don't like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you about it needing to be tested. I would never object to that, but I think we should come up with a way to test it, and keep
As a
it
non-recommended
marked as
thing.
demo.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. But yeah, at that point it's like so that's basically, since we still don't want to document it, that's not a doc test. So that becomes like an integration test. Maybe we write an integration test for it in the main repo. But do we want to go do that, which would be more work probably than just like actually do like settling on a 2-chart approach that we could formally document and test, right? I don't want to write tests around this thing that if we know that like we don't want to do this when we can just do a 2-chart thing that would be something we could document as like a first class option. But
I'll say for my part, the testing bar for documenting a new first class option for how we're going to upgrade and continually maintain charts is going to be much, much higher than what it sounds like we need to make sure that our 5 lines of YAML combine charts in a Helm compatible way.
yeah, I guess like I would like most of it would just like most of that stuff is covered by doc tests now, right? Like that's the big gap, is that if we don't document it, we get no doc tests, and doc tests are where the vast majority of our installation coverage comes from in practice. Like we have some integration tests, but they're not as exhaustive as the doc tests. But yeah, like we could do something. I'm fine meeting halfway. If we say we don't want to remove it and we want to write some minor integration test around it or something, and then to make that work, we fix bugs in the individual constituent charts that make composition not work as a side effect of that. That's fine too. But yeah, I mean, most of the work, I just want to make sure we test composition, because Helm charts that don't compose tend to be because they have bugs in them, which is show up when you start composing them. So it isn't really that like the composition is difficult; it's that it exposes issues in the charts that you're composing that you need to fix, which is what I would expect to happen if we start to test it, which I'm fine doing. But I want to make sure that that's what we want to do, if that's what we want to do. So do we want to remove, or do we want to write a non-docs test around the current wrapper? Floor is open, I guess. I'm fine doing either for what it's worth. So I will go with the recommendation of what people feel more comfortable with here.
I mean, given that we felt compelled to add this thing in the first place, if there's a relatively low testing bar that can be met to achieve not a production grade of assurance, but a
Reasonable coverage.
a smoke test like coverage, I think that's probably worthwhile to avoid user disruption.
Okie doke. I'll go do that. That works.
Yeah, hopefully that won't take a lot of your time, Ben. Thank you.
I'm happy to help with this. For what it's worth, Hugo, the tool we use for our docs, has a hide attribute that we can set on a page. So that might be a good place for us to start in terms of low-hanging.
Okay, yeah, like mostly it's just I want to smoke test around it so that chart bugs in the composite chart, the decomposed charts get fixed, right? So like I expect to like go write this test, and then like the individual charts will have bugs that make them not compose nicely, and we go fix those. I suspect most of the effort will be there, but that hopefully shouldn't be too bad. I just want to have something in place so that we don't break composition, and we find anything that prevents composition and fix it. Yep. Sounds
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben.
That's great. The Docker has a feature you can hide the page. I mean, one day, we might make the page available as a sample too. So.
Okay, moving on. Ben, did you want to talk about the ambient API additions, or do you want to kick that to the Wednesday?
I think actually these have resolved themselves. One of these has already been merged. The other one, the DNS, actually, can someone click one of those? The only one we're talking about is like the DNS one, I think, and this might just be an FYI. This one. So just as a context, the approach that I think we settled on in the Wednesday meeting before was that we were going to use the selector style thing for this as an opt-out, because in preference, instead of basically use like the thing we talked about maybe for the auto enroll, a selector-based approach, use that for this instead, rather than the pod level opt-out. If that's still what we want to do, that's fine. I think, okay, so context is either we continue leaving DNS proxying off by default, or we turn it on and have a pod level opt-out, or we turn it on and don't have a pod level opt-out, which seems to be the solution no one wants. So the idea is like we want to turn it on by default, which probably means we need some sort of pod level opt-out. So doing some sort of selector-based opt-out is what I think we settled on the last meeting. That is still the plan. If everybody's okay with that, that's what I'm going to do with it.
And this is not related to auto enroll?
No, it's just that it would use the same sort of API style to define, but it's not related other than.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, good for me. So is the idea to enable this DNS proxy in 125 by default, with this feature land in 125 so that user can potentially disable the pod level if needed?
I don't think we settled on when we would switch the default, but the idea is to have this in place before we switch the default, whatever release that happens to be.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. That's cranking along. Do we have anything else? Any things people want to bike shit on? I'm not going to do it now, but I am going to put on the agenda for the next TOC meeting, which hopefully we'll have our new members seated, to talk about roadmap planning for 125.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Louis, when would that be? That'd be early January?
Oh yeah.
It's
Probably the TOC.
The code freeze is January though, so
Yeah, I know. So that's
maybe
not
let's say if you roadmap for
the year.
Well, we could do year, or we could just do I don't know, half the year. Like we could do shorter term. But if we do just for 125, it's just going to be by the time.
Yeah,
Well,
our next meeting is Monday, January 13th. So we can adjust that if that's what we're scheduled for.
I mean, I think the TOC should get together before then to talk about it. It doesn't have to be online.
Yeah, yeah. That, I
Um,
mean, that's fine. But if we need to plan for 1 to 25, we need to do it like now because it's rapidly. Like we probably have 5 decent weeks of development, basically.
Oh, 3. Counting, deduct 2 weeks for holiday.
I did, but maybe you take more holiday. Because we have all of January, so
Yeah.
and maybe a week.
well, maybe we could use this time a little usefully in advance. I think it still makes sense to wait for the 2 new TOC members if they're going to be seated this week, so we could do the planning next week. How about that? Or at least some of it. And then, but I did want to start gathering requirements and start analyzing what we're seeing from user feedback in the community, and using that to inform what we think is pressing in terms of the roadmap.
I think that's reasonable. I just don't have a good feeling for 125 because next week, right, are people going to start taking off? Like,
Oh no, like I don't expect much to be delivered. No, I mean,
Mike already said code freeze is on January 21st. So we're looking about like 2 weeks in January to deliver things. So I don't even know if the roadmap will be able to close out by end of next week for 125. So I think 125 probably like John said, it makes sense to just do roadmap planning for a longer period, not just for the code freeze on 21st.
well, I think we should also include like what is actually going to be done in 125 besides bug fixes, right? Like the stuff that Ben just talked about, for instance, right? That would be part of the roadmap for 125. Right, just because we gather requirements doesn't commit anybody to delivering any of them.
Okay, that sounds good. As long as you don't commit anybody to
Oh
deliver.
no! Oh, good grief! No.
Yeah, because we're not going to hold the release for delivery of these big items.
No, there's no way.
Okay, sounds good. Yep, 125 plus.
Yes, no, definitely 125 plus. But we should at least have some idea what's going to ship in 125. Right? So we should do that too. And if there's anything else we're supposed to be aligning with outside of our control, that's also useful to know. I don't think there are any gateway API releases planned in the next 3 months, or 2 months. Mike, do you know of anything coming?
I'm trying to think. I think February-ish, something like that.
That
I
would
don't
be too
think.
late for them.
I don't think it would be till after. The other big thing I know is that Keith is planning to be working on multi-cluster ambient. I think it would be very tight to be able to get something preview within the 125 timeframe, but I'll definitely talk to him and see how that shapes up once we get back in January.
Yeah, I think we're thinking of that as essentially like a train schedule. We're going to be working as hard as we can on getting multi-cluster alpha ready. If it's alpha ready by 125, we would like to include it. But we recognize that that's a stretch, and that if we don't make it, then it won't be in 125.
Yeah, makes sense. So Michael, for the gateway API, is that the next release of the gateway? I guess it's 1.3, the release in February?
Yeah, it would be 1.3. I'm looking up see if we have an exact date and time frame for that yet. John also mentioned something worth noting in chat of we've been lagging a bit on some of the experimental gateway API implementation stuff. So I know there's a few things that have come out in 1.1 and 1.2 that we have not implemented yet.
Okay, good. And let's note that on the roadmap doc. Yep.
Yeah, I will say part of that, to some extent, is because we got burned hard by implementing a different experimental feature, and then they screwed us over by breaking changes to it, which they're free to do as it's experimental. But those changes impact us in a very negative way that was unanticipated. So we should probably do it, but just throwing out part of why. Whereas in the past, like the day something is merged, we'd have it implemented. At least for me, that gave me some pause on hopping on these features too soon.
Yep.
We'd also aim for like having the stuff implemented so that if and when it does become stable, we're ready to go day one with that versus.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Like implementing it is definitely a good idea. And the reason we got burned is for different reasons. It was experimental fields and stable API is like it's maybe less. I don't know. It was a different scenario. Like we were writing the field, not reading it, so it's probably not applicable. But something to consider.
Okay, yeah, so this is going to be funny to talk about here. I did do an exercise where I went through the Slack channel, which, noisy as it is, to look at the types of questions people were asking about, what types of features they were asking about. So I'll gather that up and share it with the TOC, with the new TOC. So I have that sitting around somewhere.
Thank you.
It wasn't quite what I expected, actually, now that I think about it. And leaving aside bugs, configuration, and how do I get this thing working type of stuff, the people will be shocked to know that the number one thing people asked about was extensions.
Extensions like our Prometheus extension, etc.
Envoy filter for waypoints, but just in general. Yeah, that came up a few times.
People love that Swiss Army knife, don't they?
They do.
I know it's early to talk about roadmap, but it strikes me that one of the things that might make sense for us to do throughout the year is to start looking at the most common use cases, if there are common use cases, driving folks to the break glass methods of WASM and Envoy filters, and seeing if we can't add first class support. I know anecdotally, internally, I've heard a lot about rate limiting requiring Envoy filters and some friction there. If we could reduce the pressure by 50% for our users to break that glass, I think that would result in a much better experience.
Yeah, it's just the same conversation in Istio for the last 6 years. So yeah, it should be easy. Okay. Is there anything else anybody wants to talk about?
I know we're supposed to now have a quarterly meeting with steering. Do we know, are they waiting on us to schedule that? Or are we waiting on them?
I think we're waiting on them.
Okay.
Seeing as we're also waiting on them to vote.
Fair enough.
But we are supposed to do it I think it's supposed to occur in a normal course of business. It would occur after the new steering is seated quarterly, but we haven't had one. So I assume it will be after the new TOC is seated.
And when does the steering seating happen? Is that immediately at the first of the year, or does that like in February?
No, that's February.
February. So my guess is the meeting may not happen until the new steering are seated, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So February, I think it's the contributor seats first, and then the community seats might take another few weeks also.
That makes sense.
So I would guess the first time when we meet, it's time for us to present the roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing the steering is going to care most about anyway. So
Yep.
all right, we're in administrivia at this point. Is there any technical content people want to talk about?
I think in the new year, I'll probably begin resurrecting some of our conversations around tag APIs. Now that we're further down the line and have gotten some feedback from ambient users, trying to settle on anything better than mutating webhook configs. But I'll start those sort of within the docs that we've already got over the holiday, kind of quietly, and then we can pick it up in full force in the new year.
Okay. Do you want to just stick that in the future, Mitch?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, if that's it, I think we are done. 14 glorious minutes back.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks
Thanks,
everyone.